All right. So, the undecidability problem is the idea that we don't understand why existence rather than non existence, and why existence is in this way rather than any other way. Um, that is kind of not really talked about. I mean, nowadays it's just kind of taken for granted, and philosophy is like moved on. Um, Even though every claim and every judgment presupposes these two questions can be answered. Um, so, basically, what we're all interested in is what is the ground of decidability. What is saying why yes rather than no, and also why no rather than yes? Meaning, the trick here is that non actuality is not excluded. So, the ground of decidability is what enables existence rather than non existence. But the absence of the ground of decidability leads to non actuality. So, what is the ground of decidability? Well, the first thing that we need is how existence is must be decidable, meaning like that it's this way rather than another way needs a rationale that explains why it's not symmetrical, or it has to be symmetrical. That's what my point is that how existence is has to be decidable. So that is actually the criteria. That's the ground of decidability, is that how it is decidable. So there's two options to start with. We have one eternal actuality. That's basically this, and we go, it exists eternally, and we aren't bothered by the fact that there's existence rather than non-existence. We accept it, but that's undecidable. So that's goes in the non-actuality category. It's not that it's being excluded, it just doesn't turn into actuality. So non-actuality is not excluded. So for actuality to be possible, you can't have one eternal actuality. You have to divide it up into an eternal regress of intervals of actuality, so that you can exploit the past versions of existence. We can use those past versions of existence in order to explain the present version. It's like a magic trick, sort of, where we're using the past to explain the present. And as long as there was never a first interval of actuality, that's how we're getting away with it. So the eternal regress is what's going to enable us to be able to, for all the features of existence to be able to account for themselves reflexively. So the first problem is that you have to have a model. It can't be like the universe explains the universe, because that's circular reasoning. So it has to be like a model from the past universe is explaining this version. And then that model is projected from the universe before the previous universe, because it can't project itself. So it's a method of like deferring responsibility. This is an extremely complicated set of ideas that will take maybe 100 podcasts to like flesh out, with me writing on a whiteboard with diagrams. This is just an initial crude introduction. So we're trying to explain how existence is using the past version of existence, but without using directly circular reasoning. So we have a model as a buffer. Now the model is going to have, it's built out of qualitative numbers, 0 through 9. And so like 0 basically qualitative zero. It's not like quantitative zero. It's not nothing. It's like some set of ideas that cancel other sets of ideas. Like in this case, it's the what I call the openly closed open closure and the closely opened closed openings. And those two things are the most important ideas, more important than the other 9 qualitative numbers, because the openly closed open closure is the thing that projects. The open part is saying it's referring to the past universe, and it's closing the present. And the openly closed part is that it's not entirely closed, and that's like all the fact that we can't predict all the quantum events. Well, they're undecidable. They're not simply unpredictable, they're undecidable. And how we deal with that is, I can't go on the entire mechanism now, but like stuff from qualitative zero, ideas generated in as part of qualitative zero will project the past into the present, those actual undecidable events. So like microscopic events, like they're partially like mutually limiting each other, but like there's a residual undecidability, and that has to be explained through deference, where it's like it's projecting from the, this is so hard to explain. Maybe I'll pass over that. Yeah, I can't explain that without a diagram. So basically we have this model, and the previous model projects the present model, which projects the present universe. And then there's going to be another model that's going to project the next one. And it's composed of qualitative numbers 0 through 9. Part of the 0 parts generating a lot of the categories. The 9, the fact that it's 9 comes from the actual 9th interval of it. The 9th qualitative number, it actually has 0 through 9. It has a quantitative part and a qualitative part. And that qualitative part is what explains the next version, like why it has 0 through 9. So it's reflexive, but it's not directly reflexive, because it's the model explaining the, it's like the, well, there's many versions of reflexivity. There's reflexivity, there's reflexivity without reflexivity, there's non-reflexivity without non-reflexivity, and there's non-reflexivity. And the model is non-reflexivity without non-reflexivity. It's like it's not circular reasoning, but it resembles it, because the model is derived from the same universe, in a sense. What else? It's the 0 through 9, that's reflexivity without reflexivity, because it's actually, the 0 through 9 is not, it's like the features of the previous open closure are explaining the general features of the present one. So it's not directly reflexive, but it's indirectly reflexive. And the reflexivity thing is the fact that we have to already presume an eternally non-eternal regress. But all these concepts, like reflexivity without reflexivity, and non-reflexivity without non-reflexivity, and then pure non-reflexivity and pure reflexivity, these are closely open to closed openings. You don't have to know what that means, but it's part of the qualitative zero thing. And it just generates all the possible possibilities that describe nature. we'll get into those. I don't even want to begin to get into those because, yeah. What else? One thing you might notice about existence is it already comes in prepackaged into scales, and there's actually 36 scales, and they come in pairs, so there's like 18 pairs, and those 18 pairs are grouped into 6, with each with 3 parts, and that's where you get like the chemical realm, and then the biological realm, then the perceptual realm, and the conceptual realm, and then up higher in scale you have the intergalactic realm and the extragalactic realm. And all of existence has this like 3 of 2 of 3 of 2 of 3 of 2 structure, and it's like that because it complements a 2 of 3 of 2 of 3 of 2 of 3 coordinate system for atom, molecule, and crystal, or crystalline array. Those 3 coordinate systems are the negative and positive is the 2, and of the 3 is the 3 dimensions, say, of an atom, or the 3 dimensions of a stick figure molecule, or the 3 dimensions of the crystal. That balances the 3 of 2 of 3 of 2 of 3 of 2. So an example of these scales that have 3 parts and they come in pairs is like abdomen, thorax, and head. Or organ system, organ tissue is the next one down, and that forms a pair. Then the next part of the I call them hyperscales. So there's a biological hyperscale, and it has 6 scales, or 3 pairs of scales, like the 2 I just said. And then we have the outer cell, the nucleus, and then the nucleolus. And then we have the location of the protein, the location of the quaternary structure, which is a combination of proteins. Then there's the location of the protein in the quaternary structure, and then there's the location of the appendages to the tertiary structure. And the next scale down is the primary, secondary, and tertiary folds of the protein. And then the next scale down is exon, gene, and the promoter sites. Then we get into the chemical hyperscale, which has 6 scales also. The first one being codon, which has 3 bases, and then I forgot what it's called, the phosphate, and then there's 2 versions, and where it has a ring and a ring and a bigger ring, and that's the 3 parts. And then you go another scale down, and you have the ground state of the nucleus of an atom, which is like helium-4, and then you have the rest of the nucleus, and then you have the outer electron shells. And you'll notice that these scales come in like a unit and a combination of units and another combination of units. So they're grouped in kind in one way, meaning like the energy levels of the nucleus and the energy levels of the outer electrons, there's a similar structure to them, in contrast to just like the helium ground state, helium-4. But helium-4 and then the rest of the nucleus are like grouped together in size compared to the outer electrons. In fact, if the nucleus of an atom were about like the size of a marble, then the outer electron should be like the size of a football stadium, which is crazy. But even crazier is that it's imperceptible. I mean, what we observe when we like scatter lasers off a crystal or something, we're not actually proving that atoms literally exist in a macroscopic sense. we're just observing the effects and then reconstructing those effects. But it could just be all effects. And that's part of that reflexive explanation I was talking to you about. At the bottom of existence, it's like incomplete. This is basically Gödel's theorem applied to the universe itself. And the bottom of existence is the quantum undecidability is like where you could really see it. It needs like an extra explanation. It can't be completely self-contained and be coherent. And even then, like the whole mechanism, it can never have a starting point. Like there can't be a first universe. There has to be an eternal regressive universes. Okay, back to scales. Each scale has like a characteristic sort of like pattern to it, and it's explained in the one of the 0 through 9, the qualitative numbers. Same with the 3 of 2, 2 of 3 thing. That's in the qualitative numbers thing too. But every aspect of existence is in there, like the dimensions of a collision, like gravitation, tidal forces. These are all separate effects too. They're not like one effect. So each scale has like its own rules. So it's not like there's just one rule for gravity. That's why they keep having problems with like trying to explain galaxies with the same pattern that Einstein used, or clusters of galaxies, because it is a different kind of situation or scenario. I could just keep talking. The reason, I guess I'll talk about, okay, most of the problems in society are based on like left brain and right brain different priorities. And a philosopher, Ludwig Wittgenstein, once said there are no private languages, but what we're seeing recently where people can't agree is that we only have private meanings. We say the same words, but we mean something completely different. We have different life experiences. So we trigger each other, especially when we're online and we can't see all the different cues. But most conflict, especially historically, seems to be related to a left brain, right brain preference. Like every conflict in history is a relatively more linguistic and bureaucratic side versus a relatively non-linguistic, less bureaucratic side. And we can also see this in like third world countries too. But in every case, it's usually white on darker. But there's other cases where it's not like that. Like there's this show on Netflix called The Last Kingdom, and the Danes tried to take over the Brits. And you see, they were seen as like primitive because they didn't have writing, whereas the British people the Christian people were very bureaucratic. It's like they go together, and they had writing, so they're like more linguistically advanced than the Danish people, who are seen as like primitive and rogue, heathenistic. But we see that pattern. In fact, it's the origin of racism itself. That's the justification for like why people treat people like slaves, is because they see them as more primitive, because they don't live in their world of abstractions. The left brain likes abstractions, whereas the right brain likes concrete pictures. It's directly related to experience, whereas the left brain's only indirectly related to experience. The left brain is binary, because language is binary. It speaks. The left brain only understands if it is or it isn't. It doesn't like sorta or maybe.